so excited to have David Thejl-Clayton here. He works for JN Data. He is over in Denmark, I believe. And David's a great example of the power of networking and Twitter, which we've talked about. So David and I are Twitter friends. I still don't think we've met in real life, but we see each other on Twitter, and he's been great about sharing his ideas with the community. So really excited to hear from you, David. Please take it away.
Thank you very much. Do I also have control of the slides here? Do I just click? Or
you should. If you click in, we will verify that. There you go.
Okay, awesome. Let me just check one more thing. Yeah, perfect. Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, so welcome guys to my talk, VERISize Your Way into CTI. The talk today is going to focus basically on this picture, essentially how we take unstructured incident data, data that we can collect from our incident response process, put it through something. Here I'm just taking the liberty of calling it the VERISizer, and how we can end up producing fancy metrics and stuff, but things that can actually help assist strategic decision making. So getting good data out of your incident response process and enabling people to higher up in management layer or wherever you need to kind of tell a good story about what's going on and enable them to make interesting decisions or good decisions based on your data. A tiny bit about me. This is me looking much younger than I do now, but I am British. I live in Denmark with my wife and 2 children. She's actually supposed to give birth today, so I'm quite happy the baby held on until now. So at least I can get through my talk. But I am the Cyber Defense Center department manager at JN Data. I have a team of 10 people now, plus 2 interns. I love open source. I love the mindset behind it. I love the whole sharing part of it. As Katie said, I'm trying to be more active in the community and sharing all of my ideas and all the things that I'm doing. I'm a blogger. I guess that talks into my open source side. I have a blog called Security Distractions, where I blog about, used to be about Elasticsearch, but it's moving more into incident response focused stuff. And then I love teaching and I love mentoring. So as I said earlier, I have some interns at the Cyber Defense Center where I just love bringing them up to speed with what's going on and kind of educating the new generation of CTI or even just cybersecurity people. My life in CTI, I'll just focus on this very, very quickly. I guess it started in 2017 where I started playing around with MISP, and a great colleague back then, he introduced me to the MISP platform. And then throughout 2017, 2018, I started looking at, okay, IOCs, threat feeds, started poking around in automation of those threat feeds and that threat data. But I always had something in the back of my head that was like, what do we do with all of this stuff? Where's all these IOCs coming from? How do I begin working with them? What should I do to understand what these actually are? And so Q 2019, and this guy, Jake Williams, who taught me on the 4, 5, 7, 8 course. And this course really blew the entire kind of thing open for me. And it's one of the courses I'd say I had the most learning out of, because it enabled me to start taking kind of the stuff I'd learned earlier and move it into a more, just learn the cyber threat intelligence world a bit deeper. And off the back of that, in 2020, I also moved into playing a part in our threat intelligence committee at our central CERT in the Danish financial world. So I play quite a big role in the threat intelligence committee there as well, based on all the learnings that I had before that. Also in 2020, Rebecca will recognize this book, but I'm using this book just to illustrate that we kind of, in 2020 at JN Data, we really pushed to try to drive home this, we want to be more intelligence driven in our incident response process. And I guess that talks into what this talk is going to be about as well, is how do we apply more data into that process as well. With a future in 2021 at JN Data, we want to build a more dedicated cyber threat intelligence team. So don't just have people with some of that as a part-time role, but actually have a more dedicated team as well. A quick note about JN Data as well. JN Data, we are a financial service provider, and we cover quite a large portion of the Danish finance sector, and here are our customers here as well. We just also got TFC certified in the Cyber Defense Center as well. So if anyone knows this has been quite an important thing for us and a huge piece of work to actually get this, this stamp on our incident response team. And we're very proud of this one. So let's actually get back on track and let's actually start talking about something more valuable than me. I guess that we could start with actually beginning to ask some actual questions. So if we look at a question that maybe a very well informed CISO might ask, hey, I read the React ransomware just hit one of our competitors. What can we do about detecting it? Or another question from the same CISO or even a different CISO, how many times did we see Immertet last year? And a final one from maybe our governance team, which is basically saying, as an organization, where should we concentrate our user awareness training this year? These questions are questions that drove me in this process and drove me to start researching, well, how can we answer these questions? What sort of data do we need to collect to answer these questions? And I guess, again, this is what this talk is about. It's about showing you guys how we can put something in to be able to answer these questions and give the CTI team the data to be able to answer them quickly. And yeah, so this should be pretty straightforward, right? But let's also use an example to kind of enable us to talk more about the research that's required and to look at how we can start to work with this data. So there's just an incident summary here. And from this incident summary, this came from an incident responder. This isn't a real one. This is a fictitious one. But essentially, if we take this incident summary, I'll start to pick out some data points from here that could be valuable to work with. Now, you might disagree with these data points. That's totally fine. These are just data points that I'll pick out that we can use to move into the research and start to map these data points so I can actually show you how this can be done. So we take out Molly as the user. We take out the HR department. We can take out the malicious link. We can take out the workstation name. I think some of these are actually out of line, but that's totally fine. We'll just skip that. I think they may have compressed down. But QBot malware, the fact that it failed to beacon, and then the detection number that went off. So off that incident summary, they're a bit out of line, but that's okay. These are the data points that I'm going to extract from that incident summary that then we can talk about, well, how can we map this into something that could enable us to answer those questions we just had. So with these data points, we know that we've got these data points, but shouldn't we also maybe have some requirements to this data collection or to this data structuring? Again, maybe we don't need them, but we made some requirements ourselves as well, just to make sure that as we went through this process, we could we had the data points and have some requirements over the top. And these requirements were things like we wanted granular data recording, right? So as you could see from the data points that I collected, I wanted to know things like the affected user, the malware family that we saw, and things like the host name. Now, this isn't the extensive list. There's a lot longer list, but this is just to show that this was one of our requirements. We wanted to do granular data recording in our incident response. Ease of use. We wanted it to be easy to use by our customers who report incidents into us, the incident response team, and also the CTI team. Now, you could probably sit there and think, yeah, right, we're dreaming on that. But it was an important requirement to have in there to make sure that we did try to at least meet this one and try and get this right. And it is possible. I will tell you, it is possible up front, and you're going to see how it's possible. But the last one, and I don't know if it's necessarily a requirement, but more of something that we wanted to use it for, which was have this mindset that everything in an incident could potentially become a metric. And if we put everything as a metric, we could build graphs, we can build fancy heat maps, but not just that, we can do correlation. And correlation is probably one of the most important things that comes out of this this research and the framework that we're going to talk into in a little while. So yeah, again, these requirements are pretty broad, but again, if you don't dream, you don't get to move forward. And so with these requirements and with these data points, I guess we could talk about some of the research that went on behind this process. Now, I guess I hope everyone has seen this, or not hope everyone, but I think everyone has probably seen the South Park episode where we had the underpant loans where they had the idea to collect underpants. They didn't know what needed to do in the middle, and they knew they wanted to profit. And this was kind of the stage that I knew that I was in at this point. So what did I do? I kind of looked around a little while thinking, well, where do I start? Is there some books I should be reading? Is there something I could look into that could join the dots on this? What is it called that I'm even looking for? If I'm looking for some way of structuring the data, what's it actually called? And I was luckily enough at the first incident response summit in Oslo, just before Corona hit, I think it was. I got to sit down with a friend, Andres from Circle, who is super clued up on all of this stuff. And actually, he pointed me in the right direction at this time. And he basically said, dude, you know, what you're looking for is an incident classification taxonomy. And this kind of helped me join the dot. And then I knew that, okay, well, I should probably be researching incident classification taxonomies. So I'm going to talk a tiny bit about the research. I'm not going to go over the full research because I did a very broad set of research into the right taxonomy to choose. And I'm going to give you the highlights from that taxonomy choice. Now, with these data points back in mind, we could look at things like Circle. They actually had their own taxonomy that we'll look at in a second. First, they have their own taxonomy as well, which we'll also look at in a second. Europol had one. ENISA are doing something with one. Hopefully there's one coming. There's a lot of research out there into these taxonomies. And I've put some references at the end for people to have a look at this as well. Someone at the point when I was doing the research said, oh, you could use MITRE ATT&CK. Not for this. MITRE ATT&CK is awesome for doing intrusion analysis, but it's not quite what I needed for, you know, covering things like recording of the username, recording of the department. Of course, you can see that there's probably some areas where MITRE ATT&CK could actually help recording some of the data points, but we'll come into that later. But MITRE ATT&CK was not one of the taxonomies that I looked into because it's not for this purpose. So I'm going to show you guys a little bit about the next stage of the research that I went through. So if we take Circle's incident classification taxonomy, now I know I'm going mad with this whole CIRCLize, VERISize, but you know, once you've stuck with the concept, might as well keep going. And so I'll put my data points back up on the screen for you guys. And then I took Circle's classification language and I tried to map these points into that language. Now, I've also had a chat with the guys at Circle just to make sure that I wasn't missing anything here. And this was basically the way that I could get my incident to map into that language. There wasn't so much for me to bite on in terms of actually being able to record the user up front or any of the other bits that I wanted to record. So when I work with Circle's taxonomy here, this is what it enables me to do. And this is not to how do you say, talk bad about Circle's taxonomy. It works perfectly for them. It works perfectly for the groups that they're supporting, but it wasn't quite right for what I needed. Now, I will also mention that one of the cool things that even just using Circle's language here gives you is the ability to still work with, you know, if you lock into even just some of these wordings that you see, phishing, malware, system compromise, it does enable you to still make fancy graphs, just not of the level that I wanted with all the metrics that I wanted to apply to it. Okay, so yeah, again, I'm taking the liberty of first-izing the case. So I'll put my data points back up. Now, if I take First's taxonomy as well, First was actually even more difficult to map into. There was a lot more limited options for me, especially because First, they actually have a dictionary behind a number of their, even just on the simple thing like the actual classification of the incident, they do have a dictionary behind it, but you can only choose one. And so mapping the data on the left into First language gave a very, very kind of limited picture of the data that I wanted to record. So a summary of my research at this point was kind of, most of the taxonomies I ended up researching, they used a single case incident type to classify a case. So again, if I look at First, although there was multiple actions in there, you know, there was phishing, there was a compromised asset, First only allows you to select one of them. And that was a thing that was a trend that I kind of found throughout my research, that a number of the other languages, they also had this, you can only select one. They haven't really been built to actually then handle an investigation afterwards. They've basically been built to classify a case and then pass that case off for investigation. They're not kind of built to then hang around while the investigation is going on. They are more of kind of an upfront classification language. again, yeah, they were not quite built to support rich data recording within an investigation. And that's, again, like I said, not talking down about them. That was more just, this is what they've been built for. And I researched quite a lot more of them as well. And I found this as a trend throughout them. As with anything, it's always good to share a quote. And actually at the time, recently, when I was just going back over some of my research just to enforce what I'd done, another one of the great guys from CIRCLe, he said something like this about the taxonomy that you choose is essentially, you choose the one based on the social group that you want to be part of. So who you need to collaborate with kind of dictates the taxonomy that you choose. So in the CIRCLe world, collaborating with CIRCLe, you use CIRCLe's language, and that actually enables the sharing of data. So it's actually okay that the languages are the way that they are, but they just weren't perfect for what I needed. They didn't really suit the requirements that I had about metricizing everything. So there's still very good taxonomies. That was kind of the point I wanted to make here, that they still enable sharing, they still enable some form of interesting graphs and everything else, but they weren't quite what I needed at this point. So now I sat there thinking, oh, I found a gap. And then I was sitting there thinking, well, I found this gap. Should I just go and create my own taxonomy then? Now, I'm fairly certain everyone's sitting there with a similar feeling of, okay, is this a good idea? Is this not a good idea? And I'll give you an example of what can happen when you do this. It's not the exact one that I did, but this is just a kind of an example issue that can happen. I take those data points and then I start applying my own taxonomy or my own structure to the data. And okay, it starts out fine with username, department, incident type, cool. Then I end up in a situation, do I call it files dropped? Do I call it files retrieved? That one's fine. Then I can move on to host name, script type, first stage executed. Should I also have a first stage failed? Should I also have a first stage retrieved? It gets a bit more sticky when you start describing it yourself. Again, you can see down towards the bottom, I had the second stage retrieved. And okay, this could work. It could work for this incident, but is it going to work for future incidents? And this was kind of one of the take homes that I took from doing this homebrew research, and the homebrew work was basically, if I need to create a new field, does every new data point that I find, do I also then need to create a new field? And this was a very sticky one for me, because I kind of thought, well, when do we actually stop extending my taxonomy then? I'm going to need a board of people who are going to sit with me and actually look at this taxonomy and basically say, no, David, stop extending this language because we've had enough. Or, hey, just use this type that you've already got. You don't need to bend it a tiny bit. So this is one of the things that I started picking up on, was also how are we going to share that data? So if I create my own taxonomy, how am I going to actually share that? I'd need to build some sort of custom translation out of my language. If I wanted to start sharing with CIRCLe as an example, I'd have to build a translation out of my language into theirs. So this was one of the other issues that I turned up. Also, don't underestimate when you're working in a larger corporate body, that if you're not choosing an industry standard to start doing this, you will fail to get management buy-in. And this is a very key part of this, I guess, is that if your management doesn't buy into this choice and this work that you're doing, then it's going to have a bit of a problem being moved forward. And so adopting something that's not industry standard that just says, David's incident taxonomy, that's probably not going to go down so well with your management. But this was just another one of the things that I took on board in my research. Then something magic happened, actually, and the Verizon DBIR came out in 2019. I mean, obviously it comes out every year, but it was around this point where I was kind of blown away by the report. And then I started reading in the report, and I was thinking, well, how are they doing this? What are they using to record the data? And that's when everything kind of, for me, when that was when I found the VERIS language. Now, short description of VERIS, it's a common language for how we can describe incidents. It enables building of these powerful metrics by enforcing the data structure underneath. It was created by Verizon. They use it in their Verizon DBIR. It's a super awesome report. If anyone, I'm really saying you should go out and read this report. It's a super awesome report, and it kind of talks into the VERIS language. All the cool things that you can do with VERIS is on display inside that report. It's based on the 4 A's, and they are actor, action, asset, and attribute. And we'll actually, instead of talking more about it from this perspective, we'll actually just map our incident into it. So I can show you guys how cool this language actually is. So let's actually get into the bulk of this, which is let's verisize this thing. So if we take the language, or we take the data points that we had and start mapping them in and actually start looking at action, this is the amount of rich stuff we can start doing when we start talking about action. So here we know we had social engineering, so we set it to true. We can talk about the variety. Now, the cool thing behind VERIS as well in this situation is that there's a dictionary essentially behind each one of these fields. So if you go into things like the action, you can only choose from 6 of them. And people might think, well, that's a bit limiting. Actually, no, having those 6 and locking yourself into those 6 really, really enables powerful correlation points and powerful metrics afterwards. And we'll look at that in a second. But in here, we can map action here. We can also map the asset. Let's take a drink of water quickly. We can work with the attributes, so we can look at, well, inside this incident, we had the integrity was actually breached. So because we could see that the host was actually had actually executed and tried to retrieve the malware. We have a security incident. We can also start talking about the discovery method. We can map in our own detections in here. So we can really start to record a really rich set of information based on those points that we had. We can also look at the actor as well. You know, you can already see some really, really powerful metrics forming out of those data points that I had. Now, some of you will also notice there is still a problem with my requirement that I had where I said, hey, I want to metricize everything. Areas where you have, you know, text entry, or where you have notes where you kind of enforce the structure behind them, they're not going to enable metrics. So I was sitting back and thinking, okay, VERIS is awesome, but I still have a gap. It gets me, you know, 90% of the way or 85% of the way through. So yeah, VERIS is probably the way forward, but is there something else that I can do with VERIS that means that I can adopt it? So then I started looking at this whole, you know, VERIS versus Homebrew, because Homebrew still had some good sides to it. And then as I started reading more into VERIS, of course, you know, VERIS is generally built for public anonymous reporting. So there will be some fields that are missing by its very nature. It doesn't really look at internal facing information. You can just add that yourself. What VERIS has is a very extendable language. So you can actually just, you know, add some plus fields into it. So again, depending on how you structure it, I've just chosen to structure it very simply here, but you can actually choose how you structure the plus fields. But basically, some of the plus fields that I chose to go with are things like plus.malware.family. So we can actually then start recording the malware variant as well. Asset.username, you know, all these different things. And you'll also see I also adopted the MITRE attack framework underneath here as well. So I can actually take this even one step further and have metrics based on MITRE attack. And that was kind of where this all kind of went, cool, VERIS is it, we're done. Which we found the right language and we were happy. So we'll leave poor Molly from HR alone for a second, and we'll actually look at, well, if we don't just use this for one incident, but if we use VERIS for all of our incidents, what can we do? What does it give us? What benefits does it actually give us? Now, one of the key areas is incident response data collection. Now, this is of an absolute huge benefit to your incident response team. It enables investigation. I'll just skip through these quickly. It enables them to actually do the investigation. It kind of gives them a starting base. You know, the way that we do it in my team is we start with what we call essentially a VERIS card or an incident sheet. Yeah, we work with spreadsheets of doom as well. We've tried to map them into our case management tool, which we can look at that another time. But basically, it enables the incident responder to know, well, here is where I need to start. Here's all the fields that I want to start recording. But it also helps them do the final thing that I know a lot of incident responders get stuck in, which is, okay, when am I actually finished? When should I move on? And by using VERIS and actually having all these fields that you can populate, or once you've populated them, you're done. You need to move into response. You need to actually take action on the information you've gathered. So it enables the incident response team to actually do their work. Now, one of the other cool things, again, is it brings metrics in that. So the more that your incident response team can actually record, the more that you can use data to start telling a story. You can start enabling your CTI team to actually work with the data that's coming out. And it doesn't have to be a very difficult process. You know, you give your incident response team the spreadsheet or the data that you want to collect, and then they can just start working with that. Now, I know I make it sound easy, and we'll come into that in a little bit, but you can also use the data to help drive change, and we'll look at some of the answers to those questions we had earlier in a second. Also enable decision makers, and also understand your threat landscape. So now we've worked with VERIS for a little while. Now we've talked a little bit about VERIS. Could we go back to those questions that we had earlier and see how powerful is VERIS actually answering these questions? Let's take the first one that we had, or one of the ones that we had. Where should we concentrate our user awareness training this year? Well, if I've used VERIS in my team for the last year, I could put out something like this and actually look at, okay, well, how many security incidents are we actually seeing per department? Well, it's very clear on the screen here that it's our HR team we should probably be focusing on, because there seems to be a large amount of incidents coming out of that department. Just by adopting the VERIS framework underneath and recording something as simple as the department that's being here, boom, we can actually enable the organization to really make change and drive the governance team to understand that, hey, go focus on the HR department. There seems to be something a bit wrong in there. If we go back to the one about real ransomware as well, and actually look at, well, we could go back through all our old cases if we've been recording the MITRE attack segments that we're seeing. Now, these are TTPs for Imhotep from a while ago, and we could actually choose these TTPs and start looking at, well, in which cases have we actually seen these TTPs being used? Great, we've got these answers. We can then dig into, well, yeah, we can actually detect these TTPs, and these haven't caused security incidents. So therefore, we think we're pretty good against this. Now, we could also get a follow-up question from the CISO in terms of, those detections you've got, how many of those cases that you had detections on actually had an impact? And then again, since we've adopted this language, we could even go into each individual one of the cases that we worked on and find that in only one of the 4 cases that we had up here, was there actually an impact? And then we can begin to dig into that, because we've recorded all this data. We can actually look at, well, that case that had an impact, what TTPs were used there, what user was hit, what department was hit. We can use this to really, really empower our CISO, our CTI, everything can be empowered by this. And we'll go into the last one as well. How many times have we seen Imhotep malware in the last year? Well, okay, we record the malware family. Awesome. We've extended VERIS to include the malware family. So let's start recording it. Now, again, by recording this data, we can go back into one more. We can make some fancy graphs, right? Management loves these fancy graphs. I love it as a manager as well. Where I can also then see, well, what's the malware families over time look like? Which sort of variants are we seeing in February? Huge increase in Zloader. Why is it dropping in April? Maybe it's dropping in April because we actually took action. We did some more targeted user awareness. We can actually then go back and actually see, well, it was our recommendations we made to our governance team based on this VERIS data that actually caused change. And that's actually something that's definitely happened at JN data as well, that we've really used this data to really enforce and really help our governance team make good decisions. I know I make it sound really, really easy. I'll give you some lessons learned. Yeah, you don't simply adopt a language like this overnight. You can start, but some of the lessons that we had and early on problems were, if you adopt a new way of recording data, of course, it takes more time. You need to get your team up to speed on this. You need to actually get them to learn it. And of course, there's going to be a lot more questions to answer. So your incident response team is going to suddenly have a whole load more questions that they need to answer. Different interpretations. This is also one that we actually still face today. Even just today, we had a team meeting where we still have different interpretations of different incidents. I think this should be classified as malware. No, guys, I think it's classified as hacking. Now, the ways that you can solve this, these early problems or any of these problems, is make VERIS part of the DNA of your team. Your whole team must own it. One of the things that we did very early on was actually, or one of the things I did very early on was give it to my team and say, you guys look at how you want to adopt this. I'll help, plant the seed, but I really want you guys to own this language. And my team, they own this language. They really, really own it, and they really work with it every day, looking at, do we need to adopt additional fields? Do we need to change some of the things that we're doing? They also have a weekly meeting where we all stand up and actually present our incidents and present how we've registered the various categories, and actually then discuss, do we agree Is there a team consensus on the way that we're using VERIS? So really drive that making it part of your DNA. Practice makes perfect. We did a lot of test incidents. We did a lot of kind of walkthrough incidents with it, just testing. Are we sure this is what we're going to do? Is everyone happy with it? Again, accept the limitations. There are some areas where it doesn't quite match up. I would say we get like a 97% coverage or something of how we have it. There are some limitations to it. And again, this is based on organization to organization. So our limitations will be different to your limitations. The plus fields, and this is one thing you really need to be aware of, is if you extend the language yourself, make sure you build a dictionary behind it. So make sure you build a table of the actual data that you want to record underneath. Don't just start adding plus fields. A good example would be if you add a plus field for malware family, make sure you actually have a dictionary of the malware families you actually want to record underneath, so that when your incident response team comes, they know, okay, it's Emotet or it's Qbot and it's written in this way. So don't write Qbot with a capital B and then Qbot with a lower b in the next case, because they won't correlate. Things like that are very good advice for if you're going to adopt this language. A tiny bit of further reading. These slides I think are being published. So one of the best places to start is actually with the MIST project, with the data models that they published. They have got an enormous set of taxonomies listed up there that you can just start poking through. Have a look at what Anisa are doing. If this is interesting for you, look at what Anisa are doing with their reference incident classification taxonomy. And then go and have a look at VERIS. It is just the best, basically. Woe is how I end this talk. Yeah, that was actually it. I hope that was actually interesting for everyone. So
yeah, that was awesome, David. You're giving a lot of good feedback in the Slack channel.